I sat there motionless, the linen napkin still folded in my lap, as my daughter raised her crystal glass and smiled the way she always did before drawing blood. "To style," Chloe said sweetly, "and to those who dress like Goodwill mannequins and call it personality." Laughter bloomed around the table. Even her husband smirked. My granddaughter looked at me, but didn't speak. I glanced down at my vintage skirt, the cardigan fastened with the brooch my mother wore to chemo, the one I'd once promised Chloe would inherit, after hemming her Easter dresses by hand, after giving up my gallery show to help her raise Maya. After carrying 3 generations of women on my back, I was no longer mother, no longer honored, just the target at the center of her punchline. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Thanksgiving at Chloe's house looked like a spread from a magazine, one that took itself a little too seriously. The table was dressed in cranberry velvet and bone-white plates rimmed with gold. A row of cinnamon-scented candles flickered down the center like a landing strip for dysfunction. The catered turkey glistened, perfectly brined and sliced. No carving drama, no family dog stealing a drumstick, just sterile perfection. Marilyn stepped inside clutching a bottle of Cabernet and a forced smile. Her vintage wool skirt hugged her waist, and her soft gray cardigan was fastened with a tiny antique brooch, a sapphire starburst framed in aged silver. It had belonged to her mother. She wore it sparingly and never around Chloe, but this year she didn't care. "Marilyn," Chloe greeted with a sing-song voice and brittle cheek kiss. Her eyes slid over the outfit like a scanner. How nostalgic. Grant, Chloe's husband, took the wine and muttered thanks without making eye contact. Maya, Marilyn's daughter, waved from across the room, a flicker of relief in her eyes. They took their seats after polite hellos and overdone compliments on the centerpieces. A server in black brought plated starters to the table. The first hour went down like a tepid cocktail, dull, forced, predictable. Conversation skated across safe topics: real estate prices, airline delays, and whose child had the best SAT scores. Marilyn mostly listened, nodding at the right moments, sipping slowly. Then came dessert, and with it, Chloe's performance. As the server placed down pumpkin brulee with spiced whipped cream, Chloe lifted her crystal glass. "A toast," she announced, tapping her fork delicately. The room quieted. "To style," she began, eyes twinkling with something colder than humor. "To those of us who still care, who still try, and to curated elegance." She paused, the corner of her mouth tilting up. "And those who dress like Goodwill mannequins and call it personality." A thin ripple of laughter fluttered around the table. Grant smirked. One of the cousins gave a short bark of amusement. Maya froze mid-bite. Marilyn didn't move. She stared at the flame of the candle nearest her, hands resting on the linen napkin folded in her lap. Her fingers trembled, but she held them still, gripping the fabric like a lifeline. The brooch glinted, catching the candlelight. Chloe turned back to her brulee as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't gutted her guest with surgical precision. No one said anything. No one ever said anything when Chloe drew blood. After dessert, Marilyn stood slowly, stacking her plate on top of Maya's. "Excuse me," she said gently. "I think I need some air." She walked out onto the porch alone. The cold bit through her cardigan, but she didn't flinch. She pressed her fingers against the brooch, feeling the familiar grooves, the cool metal warming under her skin. Her mother used to wear it to church, to dinners with men who didn't deserve her, to chemo appointments even. She said it made her feel brave. Inside, laughter bloomed again, Chloe's unmistakable trill bouncing off the polished walls. Marilyn stood in the dark and remembered the versions of herself she used to believe in. Her phone buzzed. "Maya, I liked your outfit." A second later, "Don't let her get to you. She's not happy. She just hides it better than most." Marilyn stared at the screen for a long time. Then she slowly unpinned the brooch and held it in her palm, fingers curling around it like a secret. From the kitchen window, she caught sight of Chloe's reflection in the glass. Smiling, confident, untouchable. Marilyn's mouth tightened, but her eyes stayed calm. She slid the brooch into her pocket, exhaled once, and walked back inside, silent and steady. Tomorrow she would begin something she couldn't stop. The cedar chest hadn't been opened in over 6 years. Marilyn slid it out from the corner of her bedroom, where it had lived under a gauzy white cover, half hidden beneath a leaning stack of old coffee table books. Dust clung to the hinges. She ran a fingertip along the carved edge, oak leaves and vines, hand-tooled, and then, slowly, lifted the lid. A faint scent bloomed out, lavender sachets, thyme, and something like old sunlight. The top layer held silk scarves folded with obsessive care, their colors still rich despite the decades. Beneath them, gowns and tissue paper, fur-trimmed gloves, a beaded clutch from her first gala with James. A photo fluttered loose and landed on the carpet, her in a navy sheath dress, hair piled high, smiling like the world hadn't yet shrunk. She sat back on her heels, breathing it all in. Every piece had a weight to it, stitched memories, hard-won elegance. Not trendy, not expensive for the sake of it, just hers. She pulled out a long strand of pearls and felt the clasp click between her fingers. James had gifted it the Christmas after Maya was born. Back when he still remembered holidays without a secretary's reminder. Marilyn blinked and set it aside. Then she reached for the will. The copy sat in her nightstand drawer, untouched since last winter. She unfolded it now and scanned the page with the steady calm of someone about to correct a mistake. Her name was scrawled across the top in bold serif, but what she was looking for came near the end. In the event of death, the following possessions shall be passed to. She found Chloe's name not once, 3 times. The jewelry, the wardrobe, the house. It had seemed fair once. Chloe was her niece, her only living relative besides Maya, who had said more than once she didn't want things. Marilyn had imagined Chloe cherishing these heirlooms, wearing the brooch maybe, or keeping the cedar chest intact. That illusion had died last night with a fork tap and a line about mannequins. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Trevor Yates," came the voice on the other end, crisp and well-rested. "It's Marilyn Sinclair. I need to dress my estate differently." A pause, then a quiet chuckle. "Tell me where to start." Dolly's kitchen smelled like cinnamon toast and apple cider. The old linoleum squeaked under Marilyn's heels as she walked in, clutching the brooch in one hand. Wrapped in velvet, Dolly looked up from her crossword and gave her a long, appraising look. "You come here looking like a memory I forgot to miss." "I had Thanksgiving at Chloe's," Marilyn said, setting the velvet down on the table. Dolly didn't ask why. She opened the cloth and stared at the brooch like it had spoken first. "What did she say?" the older woman asked finally, voice tight. "She toasted to style. Called me a Goodwill mannequin." Dolly's mouth went flat. "That girl forgot who hemmed her life. You remember who stayed up sewing those Easter dresses when her mama ran off to Vegas?" "I do," Marilyn whispered. "She thinks class comes from a Nordstrom card and a Botox gift certificate. I've seen landfill with better soul." Marilyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "She gets nothing," she said, voice steady. "Not the house, not the jewelry, and not a stitch from that cedar chest." That afternoon, she pulled the dresses out one by one. Each had a story, a navy velvet wrap she wore to her first museum gala, a pinstripe sheath from James's company award dinner, even the leather gloves from the march she joined after the ERA was gutted. She labeled them all in thick black ink, to donate. Every piece Chloe would have stripped for resale. Marilyn now marked for someone who'd appreciate its history without twisting it into a punchline. A silk blouse had a small tear at the cuff. Marilyn stitched it quietly under warm light, hands calm, breath even. This wasn't mourning, it was clarity. Maya peeked in from the hallway, eyes landing on the labeled boxes. "You're getting rid of all this?" "No," Marilyn said. folding a scarf with purpose. I'm passing it forward. Maya stepped inside, saying nothing, but her hand brushed the edge of the cedar chest. That night, Marilyn sat on her bed, will in hand, pen uncapped. She crossed out Chloe's name in thick black ink. But before she could write the replacement, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I heard what she did at dinner. You're not the only one she's gutted. Marilyn stared at the screen, heart slowly beating louder. She picked up the phone and replied, "Who is this?" The answer came instantly. "Unknown. Someone who wants to help you bury her." The printer hummed in the corner of the room, slow and deliberate. Marilyn stood beside it, arms crossed, watching each page feed out onto the tray. At the top of the printout, Chloe Sinclair's Thanksgiving photo dump, a carousel of filtered perfection. Designer shoes, gold-leaf dessert plates, a close-up of the table decor. And then, mid-scroll, a group shot of the family. There she was, center frame, lifting her glass with that smile carved in ice. The caption read, "We all have that one relative who still thinks a brooch counts as a personality. Blessed family chaos." Marilyn plucked the final page from the printer, slipped the stack into a manila folder labeled Estate, Revised, and slid it into her desk drawer. Her movements were careful, but not cold. She wasn't angry anymore. She was organized. She opened her laptop and drafted a new email. To Trevor Yates. Subject: Let's proceed. Body: Please find attached the revised disposition notes and supporting documentation. All previous beneficiaries are to be removed. New recipient listed under the trust name: Hearth and Grace Women's Foundation. Let's make this permanent. She didn't reread it, just hit send. Marilyn leaned back and exhaled, staring at the patch of afternoon light cutting across her carpet. The silence in the house wasn't empty today. It was deliberate. She had carved it out. The folder now included everything Chloe would never own. A full inventory of heirloom jewelry, designer clothing, even furniture with stories built into their grains. Marilyn had spent the morning photographing each item, printing descriptions, cataloging them with names and dates and who gave them to her. Then she rewrote her letter of intent, in pen, her own handwriting, her own voice. Legacy is not owed. It is earned. Respect, not blood, determines who receives what remains of us. She didn't flinch as the ink dried. That evening, Maya arrived without announcement. No knock. Just the soft creak of the front door, and then her face peeking into the study where Marilyn sat folding linens into labeled boxes. "I brought you something," Maya said. She held up a small sketch pad, unrolled with care. Inside was a pencil drawing, shaded delicately, full of intention, of Marilyn's brooch. Not the polished version from the photo, the real one. Slightly imperfect, old, radiant because of where it came from. Marilyn reached for it slowly. Her eyes didn't mist, but her voice dipped low. "You always saw the story, not just the style." Maya nodded, sitting cross-legged on the rug, resting her chin in her hand. "I used to watch you get ready for church," she said. "You'd touch every necklace like it mattered. You didn't throw things on, you chose." "I dressed like I was defending something," Marilyn replied. "Because I was." She stood and opened the nearest box, then pulled out a long silk scarf, vintage cream with navy corners, hand-rolled edges. She folded it once, then wrapped it gently around Maya's shoulders, tying it with a practiced flick. Maya looked down, fingers running across the fabric like it was woven with answers. "Don't save this for someday," Marilyn said. "You've already earned it." There was a long pause between them, quiet, not distant. Then Maya reached over and placed the drawing on top of the estate folder. "If she sees this," she said softly, "she'll feel it." "She already does," Marilyn replied. "She just doesn't know what it means." The doorbell rang. Both women turned toward the sound. Marilyn didn't move at first. Neither did Maya. Then, with the kind of calm she'd been earning piece by piece all week, Marilyn stood up, smoothed her cardigan, and walked to the foyer. Through the frosted glass, a silhouette waited. Tall, male, still. She opened the door. Trevor Yates stepped inside, folder in hand, expression unreadable. "You asked for permanent," he said, "but someone else just made a request to reverse everything." Marilyn blinked once. "Chloe?" Trevor didn't answer. Instead, he handed over an envelope, handwritten, no stamp. Marilyn opened it and read 2 words that made her chest go still. "You'll regret this." Marilyn didn't text back. Chloe's message sat unopened, hovering on the lock screen like a splinter too shallow to pull. "You're being dramatic. I was obviously joking." "You're so sensitive." Marilyn stared at it for a moment, then pressed the side button. The screen went black. She placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter and didn't touch it again. Instead, she drove across town with a bag full of wool coats and a tin of sewing notions. Windows cracked just enough to taste the fall air. She passed leaf piles untouched by rakes, front porches still holding onto their Halloween skeletons. No one seemed in a hurry to clean up, and she took comfort in that. Dolly answered the door with a needle in her mouth and a steaming mug of cider in one hand. "I figured you'd be by," she said, stepping aside. "We've got zippers screaming and linings in distress." The coats were stacked on Dolly's dining table, all sizes, some in better shape than others. Marilyn shrugged off her cardigan, rolled up her sleeves, and pulled a seam ripper from her purse, like it was part of her DNA. They worked in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Threads gathered in small piles like soft evidence. Dolly handed her a worn peacoat with a missing button. Marilyn found a match from her kit, stitched it tight, reinforced the shoulder seam, and laid it on the finished pile. "This one's going to hold someone's story," she murmured. Dolly didn't answer. She didn't have to. Back home, Marilyn sat at her writing desk and opened a fresh notebook, the kind with thick ivory paper and no lines to box her in. She wrote Maya's name at the top in neat cursive, then began listing the pieces not by value but by why. Cream silk blouse, first date with your father. I wore red lipstick. He noticed the blouse, gray wool cape, bought with saved babysitting money. Wore it until the elbows thinned. Gold locket, from your grandmother. Don't let anyone convince you it's old-fashioned. It held courage before it held pictures. She wrote until the page filled and then flipped to the next. She didn't describe things in terms of designers or decades. She told stories about laughter in dressing rooms, wine spilled down hemlines, and the time Maya wrapped a scarf around the cat just to make it look elegant. Downstairs, her phone buzzed again. She didn't rush to check it. When she did, it was another text from Chloe. "Okay, seriously? We were all joking. Stop making this a thing. You've always been extra." Then another, seconds later. "Can we talk? Just us, please." Marilyn stood at the window, the phone still in her hand, and watched a neighbor's kid run down the sidewalk, chasing a football thrown off course. The boy caught it clumsily, arms wide, face lit with triumph. She typed slowly, each word intentional. "Sensitivity built this family. You're now free of it." She didn't wait for a reply. The next morning, Trevor called. "It's done," he said simply. "Final filing submitted. The trust is closed and recorded. Hearth and Grace receives the assets next quarter. And the personal items. Split evenly between Maya and Dolly, per your instructions. No contest, no conditions." Marilyn nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Thank you, Trevor." "There may be noise," he added. "She won't go quietly." "She already went loud," Marilyn replied. "Now she gets silence." She hung up and opened her cedar chest one last time, not to remove, but to remember. A few items remained inside, untouched. Not because they were too good to give away, but because they held nothing she needed anymore. She ran her fingers over the empty shelf inside. At the bottom of the chest, taped beneath the lining, was a tiny envelope she'd forgotten existed. Yellowed, hand-addressed. Her mother's handwriting. She pulled it free, heart ticking faster, and opened it. Inside was a folded note and a photo, Marilyn at 22, wearing the brooch. The note read, "They won't remember what you wore, just how you made them feel about themselves." Marilyn closed her eyes, clutching the paper like a lifeline. Then she heard the front gate creak. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out. Chloe's car. She hadn't even bothered to park across the street. The next morning, Marilyn sat at her kitchen table with a cup of black tea and a manila folder labeled Vital Docs. Updated. Inside, her medical directive, power of attorney forms, notarized letters, and the latest copy of her will, all stamped, signed, and bulletproof. She added one last document, still warm from the printer. A full revocation of Chloe's access to her financial and health records. The new POA was Dolly. The paperwork felt like armor. The kettle clicked off behind her. She didn't get up. Her phone lit up with Chloe's name. She let it ring twice before answering. "Why is my access gone?" Chloe snapped. Marilyn took a breath and replied evenly, "Because your respect is too." A pause. Then static breath. "You're making a mistake." "No, I'm correcting one." She hung up. No drama, no exclamation points. An hour later, Grant's name appeared on her voicemail list. She played it on speaker while sorting linen napkins by color and condition. "Hey Marilyn, it's Grant. Look, I know Chloe can be sharp sometimes, but this isn't really necessary. You're overreacting. Maybe we can all sit down and—" She stopped the message mid-sentence. Pity and guilt had a smell to them, and she wasn't letting them air out in her house anymore. Instead, she typed up a formal letter reaffirming her legal and mental capacity. Treble-spaced. Signed and dated. Delivered in person to Trevor's office, where she had him notarize it on the spot. "If anyone tries to challenge the filings," she told him, "I want them to know I've already anticipated them." Trevor looked at her over his glasses. "They're going to be very upset." "I'm counting on it," she replied. That night, Chloe imploded online. A Facebook post popped up at 7:43 p.m. with a black and white selfie of her looking stricken, one hand curled near her face like a soap opera villain mid-reveal. The caption read, "When your only crime was loving your family, but now you're being erased from it." Betrayal runs deepest when it shares your bloodline. The comments started off supportive. Old high school friends. Suburban yoga buddies. But by the 10th comment, the tide began to shift. "Didn't you make that toast about her outfit? Wasn't there something about a brooch? My God. You really posted her photo without asking. Tacky. You called her a mannequin. Now you want an inheritance? I hope she gave it all to Goodwill and blocked you." Marilyn didn't reply. She didn't even read it firsthand. Maya texted her the screenshots. Maya. "Some of us still know how to behave." Marilyn smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was a reminder that her dignity hadn't gone extinct. She poured herself a second glass of wine and sat down with her binder of documents. She flipped through every page, double-checking dates and details, her fingers steady, her eyes sharper than they'd been in years. There was no thrill in the power, just peace. Control wasn't about vengeance. It was about quiet reclamation. She stepped outside to breathe the cold air, the scent of firewood drifting through the neighborhood like a lullaby. Lights were on in Dolly's kitchen across the street. Maya's car was parked neatly in the driveway next door. For the first time in weeks, Marilyn didn't feel like she had to brace herself for someone else's behavior. Inside, the phone buzzed again. Blocked number. Voicemail. She debated ignoring it, but curiosity had grown teeth. She hit play. There was a pause, then a voice, male, familiar, coiled tight. "You think you've won, but all you've done is make her desperate. Desperate people don't go quietly." Click. Marilyn froze. It wasn't Grant, and it wasn't a wrong number. She walked into the kitchen, turned on the light, and checked the locks. Then she walked to the file cabinet and added one more label to the drawer. Security. The war wasn't just emotional anymore. It was about to get tactical. By noon, the locksmith had finished. Every bolt was upgraded. The back gate, which once swung freely, now latched with a heavy snap. A discreet camera perched above the porch light, its lens barely visible. Marilyn placed a small brass plaque beside the bell. Visits by appointment only. She didn't feel paranoid. She felt precise. The door clicked shut behind her with new weight, and for once, she didn't check it twice. The house, like her life, had been too open for too long. Not an hour passed before Chloe texted, "You changed the locks. You're not serious." Marilyn stared at the message, thumbs still. Then she typed, "I'm not serious. I'm focused." She deleted nothing. No overthinking. No rereads. Just send. The next day she took her mother's coat, the midnight blue wool one with the velvet collar, and folded it neatly into a garment bag. The lining had faded in places, and the buttons were warm brass, dulled by decades. It still smelled faintly of gardenia. She pressed her hand flat over the fabric for a few seconds, before letting it go. That afternoon, she drove it to the Hearth and Grace shelter. The building didn't look like much, a flat-roofed brick rectangle tucked behind an old library, but it had warmth in the right places. Inside, the winter wear event was already underway. Racks of coats, scarves, and blouses in every shape and season. A quiet buzz of voices, a few children drawing in the corner. Marilyn signed in, slipped on a volunteer badge, and got to work. She found herself near the mirror, helping a woman named Clara choose between two coats, one gray, one plum. "The gray is practical," Clara said, tugging at the sleeves. "But the plum makes me feel like I belong somewhere." Marilyn smiled, smoothing the shoulder seams. "Then take the plum. Practicality gets you in the room. Belonging helps you speak." Clara grinned, eyes welling just slightly. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all year." Behind them, Dolly snapped a photo, Marilyn mid-laugh, her hands covered in lint, a loose thread caught in her hair. She looked younger, unburdened, the way she might have looked if nobody had told her she was too much, too quiet, too sensitive. Later, back at home, she poured herself a cup of tea and opened the mail. A handwritten card, pale lavender envelope, familiar loops of cursive. From Maya, inside. "Grandma, I kept your scarf. I wear it with pride. The one with the navy corners. It still smells like you." Beneath the note was a photo, Maya in front of her college library, scarf wrapped loosely around her shoulders, smiling like she had nothing to prove. Marilyn pressed the photo to her chest, eyes closing. Not everything had to be a battle. Some things, she realized, were already won. But just as the warmth began to settle, a harsh ping cut through the room. An alert from her security app. Backgate. Motion detected. She tapped the screen. The camera feed flickered to life. Grainy night vision. Wind rattling the trellis. Then, movement. A figure moved along the hedge line. No face. Hood up. Slow, deliberate. She stared, breath held, heart a metronome gone sharp. The figure paused at the locked gate. Then turned and walked away. Marilyn locked her phone, her spine tightening, not with fear, but with readiness. She walked into her study, opened the file drawer marked security, and removed a fresh page. At the top, she wrote in ink, "If they come closer, I won't just close the door. I'll change the whole damn house." Trevor Yates opened the envelope without ceremony. Inside, a formal petition signed by Chloe Sinclair, filed through a boutique estate law firm out of Westchester. A challenge to Marilyn's legal capacity. Claims of undue influence, alleged coercion, potential mental decline. Trevor read it twice, once as an attorney, once as someone who had sat across from Marilyn while she labeled heirlooms with surgical precision. He didn't waste time. By noon, he had already submitted a response to the clerk. A sealed flash drive containing video testimony, time-stamped and verified. It showed Marilyn in his office, explaining each estate revision with crisp awareness. Names, dates, values, no wavering, no confusion, no gaps. Alongside it, he included a signed capacity exam conducted weeks prior, psych certified, notarized, and impossible to refute. That afternoon, Chloe called him directly. "You know she's not thinking straight," she said, voice sharp with affected calm. "She's surrounded herself with people who feed her paranoia. I mean, Dolly, the woman still uses a rotary phone." Trevor let the silence build before responding. "She's not influenced by paranoia," he said. "She's influenced by clarity, something you might want to try." There was a snap, probably her jaw tightening, and then the line went dead. The next day, Dolly submitted a formal statement. 1 page, typed on an old Remington she refused to part with. She mocked the very hands that clothed her, it began. "Those hands now stitch coats for women who've been left with nothing. Marilyn Sinclair is not impaired. She's enraged. Rightfully, and finally. If you see revenge, you're mistaking it for resolve." Trevor added it to the case file without changing a word. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. This one handwritten, tucked into Trevor's office mailbox. From Maya. Her handwriting was deliberate but youthful, each letter shaped like it wanted to matter. "I've lived with my grandmother, studied her, fought with her, loved her. If she ever showed signs of confusion, they came only in the face of cruelty she didn't expect. She's more lucid than any of us. She knows exactly who she is and who she's done protecting." Trevor copied it onto firm white stationery and added it to the court packet. When the judge read through the filings, she didn't call for a hearing. She issued a dismissal with prejudice. Chloe's petition was denied, on grounds of unsupported conjecture, well-documented mental clarity, and apparent retaliation after legal redistribution of assets. Trevor received the stamped order on a cold Wednesday morning and drove it straight to Marilyn's house. No email, no call, just a folder in hand and a quiet knock at the door. She opened it dressed in denim and pearls, sleeves rolled, a mug of chamomile in one hand. He held out the folder. "It's done." Marilyn flipped through the stamped papers. "Denied? Dismissed, with teeth." She set the folder on the entryway table and walked toward the kitchen. "Lemon bar?" she asked. Trevor smiled. "God, yes." Inside, sunlight poured through the bay window like forgiveness. She moved slower these days, not from age, but from finally having the right to. As she plated the lemon bars, her phone buzzed from the counter. New voicemail. She picked it up and pressed play without hesitating. This time, the voice wasn't masked in calm. "Chloe, you think this was about the money, the jewelry? No, this was about control. You humiliated me. You turned people against me. And guess what, Marilyn? Courts don't last. But I do." Click. Marilyn placed the phone down, turned off the ringer, and carried the plates to the table. She didn't flinch, didn't comment, just passed Trevor his lemon bar. Outside, the trees had begun to shed completely, their limbs bare and unapologetic. Marilyn looked out the window, eyes catching the camera feed. The street was empty, but something in her gut told her that wouldn't last. The envelope was thick, pink, and embossed. Marilyn recognized Chloe's handwriting instantly, too angular to be soft, too elegant to be sincere. Her name was spelled out in capital letters, like it was shouting through paper. She didn't open it. She slid it back into the mailbox, scribbled 2 words across the front with a black Sharpie, and raised the red flag, no forwarding. Then she went inside and opened her closet. The cedar scent was faint now, faded but present. Like a stubborn echo, the racks were still full, jackets arranged by sleeve length, skirts by hemline, shoes by season. She pulled out piece after piece with careful hands, each one folded deliberately. Not rushed, not nostalgic, just ready. By noon she had 6 boxes filled and labeled. Vintage, archive ready, display only, try-ons okay. At 2 p.m., she loaded them into her car and drove to Everwell Boutique, a women-owned store that sold curated secondhand fashion in downtown Ridgefield. The owner, Nessa, had been persistent. offering not just to feature Marilyn's pieces, but to build an entire window around them. "We're calling it Marilyn Day," she said, bouncing on her heels. "We want to honor the way you wore things like they meant something." Marilyn smiled politely. She didn't need honoring, but she didn't mind being used for something beautiful. By 4 o'clock, the display was up. A vintage navy cape with pearl buttons, a gray wool pencil skirt, a handwritten placard that read, "Elegance doesn't fade, it waits to be understood." Word spread. Photos appeared on Instagram and Facebook, shoppers tagging the boutique, hashtags forming like vines. Sa Marilyn Day, Seth's legacy in style. Not your Goodwill mannequin. Chloe saw it within the hour. She commented on one post beneath a picture of the cape and brooch combo. "Didn't she wear this to my Thanksgiving?" Some people really know how to rebrand their trauma. Marilyn didn't delete it. She didn't respond. She just let the comment sit, visible, petty, surrounded by replies from strangers who didn't owe her an ounce of silence. Imagine being this bitter and this irrelevant. Jealousy doesn't wear well on anyone. Respect your elders, especially when they dress better. Back at home, Marilyn poured a glass of Riesling and turned on the jazz station she used to listen to when James traveled for work. The house was soft around her. No creaks, no raised voices, just Duke Ellington and the hum of her dryer. She picked up a small velvet box from her desk drawer, the one she hadn't touched since Thanksgiving night. Inside, the brooch rested on dark silk, its sapphire center catching the low light. She flipped it over and revealed the engraving, hidden in the clasp's underside, her own initials, and now one more. MM, MRS. Make meaning, remember strength. She folded a short note on ivory paper and tucked it inside the box with the brooch. "Maya, this doesn't belong in a will. It belongs in motion. Wear it, hide it, pass it on, but never treat it like decoration. You always knew it was armor." She sealed the package and drove it to the post office. No delay, no tracking. She didn't need to watch it arrive. She knew it would. That night, as she washed her hands at the kitchen sink, she caught her reflection in the window, shoulders squared, lips unpainted, hair pulled back. For the first time in months, her face looked like no one else's story. Then the phone buzzed. Not a call, an airdrop request. She frowned. The name read, C. Sinclair. She hit decline. It popped up again. Then a third time. She shut off the Bluetooth, set the phone down, and whispered to herself, still trying to perform, even after the curtains are down. But in her mind, she knew Chloe wouldn't stop with a digital nudge. And Marilyn? She wasn't locking the door anymore. She was building a vault. Maya opened the manila envelope during a lull between classes. Inside, a neatly stacked packet of legal documents, stamped and initialed. At the top, a cover letter in Trevor Yates' handwriting, per your grandmother's instructions. These are yours now. Study them. Know what she's protected, and why. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a roadmap. Her tuition, her housing, her future studio, all paid in full through a private fund structured under the Hearth and Grace charitable umbrella. The account came with a note. You're free to change your major at any time. And beneath it, in Marilyn's clean script, no one wears a degree. Maya's eyes burned. Not with grief, but with relief. She called no one, just sat with it. A world rewritten in her name. That same afternoon, Marilyn was writing again. Not another legal letter, not a defense, a legacy. 10 pages single-spaced, bound with a red ribbon. Not one mention of Chloe, not in passing, not as warning, not even as an anecdote. Erased by omission. The letter read more like a field guide. Stories about resilience stitched into clothing. How to know if silk was worth saving. Which fabrics bled when washed, and which bled when betrayed. And woven throughout, advice for navigating a world that often mistook softness for weakness. At the end, she wrote, don't protect your value. Radiate it. Some people will shade their eyes. Let them. She placed it in a fireproof folder beside Maya's trust documents, just in case. Later that week, Marilyn walked with Dolly to the Ridgefield Credit Union and opened a new joint account. This one wasn't for bills or estates. It was for Maya's textile design path, whatever it became. Mentorship expenses, the memo line read. Dolly insisted on bringing her own pen to sign it. She needs skill, not just permission, Marilyn said. She'll have both, Dolly replied, and probably better posture than either of us. They laughed as the teller processed the papers. The sound didn't echo, it rooted. That Friday, Marilyn's inbox pinged. Subject: They wanted to say thank you. From Hearth and Grace attached were photos. 3 women and a teenage girl, each holding a coat, scarf, or handbag that once lived in Marilyn's closet. One wore the cream wool coat with the red satin lining. Another had on a pinstriped blazer from a board meeting that once broke her heart. The caption under one photo simply said, "This coat made me feel human again." Marilyn stared at the screen, chest tight. Then she printed the image, framed it, and set it on her mantel where James's retirement plaque used to be. The next digital ripple came, not from a court or inbox, but from Chloe. She posted again, a photo of herself in sunglasses, clutching a latte with staged despair. Caption: Some people will destroy a family to feed their ego, but truth always finds the light. This time, the post gathered nothing. No likes, no comments, just silence. The algorithm seemed to move around her like a tide avoiding something toxic. Marilyn didn't smile. It wasn't joy. It was justice in quiet clothes. Later that night, Grant left a voicemail. Marilyn, look, I didn't want to get involved, but Chloe's spiraling. Maybe just meet her halfway. Before she does something worse. She didn't respond. She didn't delete it either. She just filed it under a new folder in her phone. Warnings. Around 2 a.m., the wind picked up outside. Leaves scraped against the bedroom window like they were trying to get in. Marilyn lay awake, eyes open in the dark, listening, not afraid, not guarded, just aware. In the hallway, her security light flickered once, not motion activated. Power shift. She got out of bed, walked barefoot to the breaker box, and flipped the main back on with steady fingers. In the silence that followed, she whispered something only she could hear. Some legacies you inherit, others you earn. The article went live at 7:04 a.m. Marilyn didn't see it first. Trevor texted her the link, followed by Dolly, followed by Nessa from Everwell Boutique, with 5 fire emojis and 3 exclamation points. She didn't open it right away. She made coffee, fed the birds, and answered a donation request from Hearth and Grace. Then, once the house was quiet and the light had stretched just far enough across the kitchen tiles, she clicked. Ridgefield Woman Reimagines, Legacy Through Style, Philanthropy, and Quiet Power. The profile wasn't flashy. It wasn't bitter. It was honest. The journalist had shadowed Marilyn for 3 weeks, observing her routines, watching her organize scarves and sit with women at the shelter's new intake wing. There were no glamour shots, just candids, her reaching for a teacup, laughing in lint-covered jeans, resting one hand on a clothing rack labeled Interview Ready. Chloe's name wasn't mentioned, not once. But the story still told everything. By noon, her inbox was a threadbare flood. Old co-workers wrote from cities she hadn't stepped foot in since the late 90s. You were always style with substance. We just weren't smart enough to listen then. I still remember your navy wool suit from that board meeting. You made the rest of us look like paper dolls. You made me believe I didn't have to shout to be heard. She read every message. She replied to none. Some letters you answered just by surviving. The doorbell rang just past lunch. A delivery envelope with Maya's name on the return label. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten and creased from careful folding. Grandma, I got into the program. They accepted my portfolio, full scholarship, pre-college textile arts at RISD this summer. I'm terrified. I'm thrilled. I'm already choosing swatches. Thank you for giving me the freedom to fail until I find the fabric that fits. Marilyn closed her eyes and held the letter to her chest. Then she walked to the mantel, removed the photo of the shelter recipient in the red-lined coat, and slipped Maya's letter behind the glass. 2 women, 1 vision, different directions, same thread. At dusk, Marilyn's phone buzzed. Chloe Sinclair. iMessage. For a second, she thought about ignoring it, but the silence she'd mastered had nothing to do with avoidance. She opened it. You win. Hope you're happy. No punctuation, no flourish, just the hollow hum of someone trying to unlose face. She typed slowly, not to drag out the moment, but to make sure each syllable landed exactly as it should. I'm dressed in peace. She didn't wait for a response. She didn't expect one. That night, Dolly arrived with something large, wrapped in butcher paper and tied with garden twine. I made something for the boutique window, she said, eyes twinkling, but I changed my mind. This belongs here. Marilyn opened the package carefully. Inside was a shadow box, deep walnut frame, glass pane cleaned to perfection. Inside, arranged like a museum curation, were 4 items: a corner of the navy cape, stitched into a clean triangle, the cuff of her cream silk blouse, a single button from her mother's wool coat, and tucked in the bottom right corner, a ribbon tag that read, "For the women who outgrew apology." Marilyn didn't speak. She couldn't. Dolly just nodded, her own eyes glistening. Some pieces never belonged in closets. They hung the frame in the hallway, directly across from the front door, so it would be the first thing you saw when you entered, and the last thing you passed before leaving. Later that night, as the house settled into its quiet, Marilyn stood alone in the doorway. The street was still. The porch light hummed. She checked the camera feed. No movement. But just before she turned away, the motion light flared once, then again. This time, it wasn't wind. It was a shadow. Faint. Watching. Not Chloe. Someone else. Someone who hadn't yet learned the cost of stepping too close to what a woman builds after surviving fire. Marilyn sat at the dining table in soft morning light, her coffee cooling beside a legal pad filled with long looping script. She was writing her own obituary, not because she felt ill, not even close, but because legacy, she'd learned, is less about what you leave behind and more about what you leave untouched. She kept it short, clear. Unsentimental. Marilyn Sinclair, textile archivist, lifelong volunteer, and patron of dignity, passed away surrounded by the work she once wore. She is survived by her granddaughter, Maya Reese Sinclair, an emerging designer, her closest friend, Dorothy Dolly Hatch, her longtime legal advisor and confidant, Trevor Yates, and the women of Hearth and Grace Shelter who wore her strength long after she shed it. Below that, she added a quote of her own: "Style is what you give, not what you wear." She paused after writing it, then underlined it once with deliberate care. The final sentence read, "She left nothing unused." She wore everything with purpose. She folded the paper, slid it into an envelope, and marked it, "Deliver only if needed." Then she opened the next folder. This one held her final project, a pre-planned charity auction, already scheduled through Hearth and Grace. Every piece of clothing, accessory, and textile she'd once owned would be auctioned off, one at a time, slowly, carefully. No bulk donations, no bin dumping. Each item would be tagged with a handwritten card explaining its origin. "Wore this to the last meeting where I let someone speak over me. Sewn during a week I almost gave up, but didn't. This coat met grief and held it without apology." The auction had a title: "The Last Closet Dolly Had Cried When She Heard the Name." Trevor had already written up the trust protections. Nessa at Everwell had offered to host the first preview showing. And Maya? When she saw the sketches for the setup, she'd only said one thing: "Can I design the display?" Marilyn hadn't hesitated. "You already have." On the 3rd Sunday of the month, Just after dusk, Marilyn heard a knock on the front door. Not the bell, just a knock. Tentative, twice. She checked the camera feed. Chloe, standing alone, wearing black like it was armor, holding something flat. Maybe a binder, maybe a framed photo. Her face wasn't defiant. It wasn't broken either. It was blank, the way it looks when you've run out of performances and still haven't found the truth. Marilyn stood inside, just behind the door, eyes fixed on the live feed. She didn't move. After 3 minutes, Chloe lowered the object, sighed, and turned away. Marilyn didn't watch her walk down the path. She opened a drawer labeled Final Filings and added one more folder. Unanswered visitors, later that night. She stood beside the hallway shadow box, adjusting a corner of the navy cape that had slipped slightly in the frame. Dolly entered behind her, holding 2 mugs of lemon tea. "She came, didn't she?" Dolly asked, handing one over. "She left," Marilyn answered. They stood in silence for a while, both women sipping, both watching the small square of stitched history in front of them. "She'll tell people you froze her out," Dolly said after a beat. Marilyn smiled faintly. "Let her. You can't be exiled from a house you never built." Upstairs, the will sat in Trevor's fireproof briefcase, signed, sealed, countersigned. A legacy divided by intention, not obligation. The shelter would receive the majority of auction proceeds. Maya would inherit every design note, sketchbook, and uncut fabric bolt Marilyn ever collected. Dolly would retain control of the foundation's annual scholarship arm. And Chloe? Her name didn't appear, not even in the footnotes. No spite, no drama, just absence. The kind you don't explain, the kind you earn. At midnight, Marilyn lit a single candle in the study. She didn't pray, she didn't speak. She simply looked around the room at the pieces of her life, no longer waiting for permission to matter. Outside, the motion light flickered once, then held steady, but no one approached. Not this time. The gallery doors opened at 6 p.m. sharp. The front wall was glass, glowing gold from within. 100 small lights traced the outlines of fabric forms, floating like ghosts of the women who once wore them. Every tag had a name, a date, a moment. Not in price, but in meaning. A coat sleeve lifted slightly as someone passed. Air moved gently, like breath in a room that had never been exhaled. Maya stood near the entrance, hands folded, chin high. She wore the scarf, cream silk with navy corners, now softened with use, tied in a single loose knot against her black dress. She didn't need to say whose it had been. Everyone who mattered already knew. "Welcome to the last closet," she said into the mic, her voice steady and full. "This isn't a fashion show. This is a story archive." The crowd leaned in. She pointed to a gray wool skirt encased in glass. "My grandmother wore this the first time she gave her opinion in a room where no one asked for it." She didn't raise her voice, but she raised the bar. A soft wave of laughter, a few nods. Maya walked slowly from one display to the next, guiding the group like a docent, her words not rehearsed, but inherited. There were no pity pieces, no tragedy props, only evidence of a life built one stitch at a time. Behind her, framed photos lined the gallery's far wall. Marilyn, smiling beside women from Hearth and Grace, one in the red-lined coat, another in the plum jacket Clara had chosen months earlier. None of them were labeled. You didn't need names to see dignity. Near the back of the room, a woman stood alone in oversized sunglasses and a sleek trench coat. Chloe. She kept her head low, hands tucked deep in her pockets, moving silently from piece to piece. She stayed near the shadows, lingering by the glass cases without touching, her mouth twitching faintly at the handwritten cards. No one acknowledged her, not out of cruelty, but out of irrelevance. She was a paragraph no longer included in the revision. At the center of the room stood a raised pedestal wrapped in white linen. Dolly stepped forward, holding a single page from the program booklet. Her voice, though older, carried like scripture. This is not a fashion collection. This is a pattern of resistance. A woman's voice sewn into every cuff, every collar, every hidden seam. Marilyn Sinclair leaves us a legacy of thread, care, and consequence. The crowd broke into applause. Long, rising, echoing. Maya stepped forward again, eyes full but unshaken. "I didn't just inherit her wardrobe," she said softly. "I inherited her vision." She untied the scarf and placed it gently over the pedestal. Silence bloomed, pure and reverent. Then applause again. Louder this time, full-throated, earned. Chloe stood motionless, her jaw clenched tight. The ovation rose around her like fog that refused to settle. It was not hers, and it never had been. She slipped out the side exit without a sound. No one followed. No one even noticed she'd left, except for the security guard who checked her wristband and muttered, "Evening," without looking up. Back inside, Maya stood beside the shadow box display, now positioned near the entrance, so every visitor passed it twice. The navy cape, the silk cuff, the brass button. The ribbon tag. For the women who outgrew apology. Dolly leaned close. She would have hated all this attention. She would have adjusted the lighting, Maya whispered back. They both smiled, full and unguarded. At the back of the gallery, Trevor stood quietly, watching. He looked down at his phone and typed a single line into his notes app. She never needed a will. She needed witnesses. He pressed save and pocketed the device. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering fallen programs along the sidewalk. Inside, the display stood untouched. Not roped off, just respected. The signature took 3 strokes, sharp, clean, unshaking. Marilyn placed the pen down and exhaled as Trevor gathered the final packet into his leather folio. "That's it," he said. "It's now irrevocable. No amendments. No reversals." She nodded. The house, the land, the remaining assets, all transferred to the Sinclair Hatch Foundation, a women-led, women-run entity housed under Hearth and Grace's legal umbrella. The deed had already been notarized and filed. The front porch swing would now belong to a future no one could steal. Maya received the envelope the next morning, not from a courier, from Dolly. Inside, a single-page letter and a certified copy of a secondary trust account. This one was different. It wasn't for rent or tuition or fabric bolts. This one was discretionary, untouchable until her 25th birthday unless she presented a written proposal for creative work that aligned with the foundation's mission. It came with a note, printed in Trevor's measured handwriting. "Access means nothing without vision. You already have both. Use them well." Maya stared at the numbers, stunned. She hadn't expected this, hadn't asked for it, and yet it fit, quietly, powerfully, like a glove that had been measured years before her hands ever knew what they were reaching for. That afternoon, Marilyn sat in her study, papers spread across the table. Not contracts or account summaries, but a burial directive, cremation, no funeral, no flowers. Instead, a textile sculpture installation. She'd already named it, Burned into Thread. Maya and Dolly would co-design it using fabric from her oldest pieces, embedded with ash-infused resin threads that would stitch memory into every fold. The brooch would not be included. It no longer belonged to her. The brooch had been hand-delivered to the National Museum of Domestic Art in Philadelphia. It now sat inside a velvet-lined case in their Women in Craft and Consequence exhibit. Next to it, the placard read, "Sapphire Starburst Brooch, 1962. Worn by Marilyn Sinclair, seamstress, advocate, legacy architect. Donated with note, let this sparkle for those told to dim." Visitors were already leaving post-it notes around the display, tucked between the case glass and the wall like offerings. Some said thank you, some just said seen. Chloe, meanwhile, received a letter. Official, embossed, served by hand. The envelope was unassuming, cream, not white, with her name in bold block letters. Inside was a single paragraph. You are not a beneficiary of Marilyn Sinclair's estate, trust, or foundation. Any challenge or appeal, in whole or part, will result in permanent forfeiture of any remaining visitation, claims, or reputational use. This closure is not conditional. It is final. There is no salutation, no "Dear Chloe," just a signature line. Executed in full, with intention and finality. She read it 3 times. Then she crumpled it once, smoothed it back out, set it on the table and stared at it like it might blink. It didn't. That evening, back at the house, the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon tea and clean cotton. Maya arrived just past 7, cheeks pink from the walk over, a portfolio tucked under her arm. Marilyn looked up from the counter where she'd been rolling scarves into display cylinders for the next exhibit. Without a word, Maya crossed the room and wrapped her arms around her. Not a polite hug, a long one that said thank you without rushing it. You gave me a whole world to wear, she whispered. Marilyn leaned her head against Maya's shoulder. No, she said softly. I gave you the map. You're the one choosing the fabric. Later that night, Marilyn added one last note to the file drawer marked Endgame. It read, Every woman deserves to outlive the lies told about her. She folded it, dated it, tucked it between the auction ledger and Maya's RISD acceptance letter. Then she closed the drawer. And this time, it locked. The fabric bin clicked open like a time capsule. Marilyn sat cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by folded scraps. Lace from her mother's wedding gloves, a swatch of red wool from her first church dress, a corner of Clara's plum coat from Hearth and Grace. She ran her fingers across each one, not to remember, but to decide. This wasn't nostalgia, it was architecture. She called it the memory quilt. It wasn't symmetrical. It wasn't chic. Some edges were jagged, some pieces didn't match. But every square held something more permanent than pattern. A choice, a bruise, a breath. Maya arrived by noon with thread, pins, and peppermint tea. They worked without a playlist, just scissors, steam, and the soft rhythm of 2 women building forward. Maya sewed steadily, sleeves pushed up, ponytail loose. Every so often, she'd hold up a patch and say, Tell me this one again. Marilyn always did. That came from the dress I wore the day I quit the job that made me small. This was part of Dolly's housecoat from the week James died. She never left me alone. Not once. Maya nodded with each story, absorbing them like instructions. By the time the sun dipped below the edge of the porch, the quilt top was complete, an unapologetic collage of lives stitched together without apology. Dolly arrived after dark, threads snipped between her teeth. I'll finish the binding, she said. I like the ends. They tell you who meant it. They laid the quilt out across the floor. No centerpiece, no borders, just story. 2 days later, the gallery announced its final event. Final threads, a legacy in layers, 1 night only, attendance capped. No press. Instead of mannequins, they'd hang the quilt like a banner, weightless, floating, the way memories feel when you stop gripping them too tight. Nessa from Everwell called to confirm. She said it feels like we're closing a chapter, she told Marilyn, but I think we're just stitching a new one. Meanwhile, Chloe posted again. Not a selfie. A blog entry titled, When Legacy Becomes Performance. She described toxic matriarchs, emotional revisionism, and the weaponization of fabric. She never used Marilyn's name, but she didn't need to. The tone clung like cheap perfume. She shared it across platforms. It sank without a ripple, 0 shares, 2 pity comments. A tweet in reply said only, maybe some closets should have stayed closed. Back at the house, Marilyn sealed a white envelope with wax. It held her final letter to Maya, not for court, not for the archive, just for her. Inside, a single page of ink and resolve. If you ever feel too loud, too much, too anything, remember what was said about me. Then remember who ended up in the museum. She tucked it into Maya's coat pocket when no one was looking. Not secrecy, just timing. On the day of the gallery closing, they gathered under soft lights. Trevor wore a charcoal suit and stood near the back, silent. Dolly carried a pair of silver scissors on a velvet pillow, symbolic, ceremonial. Maya stepped up to the quilt and read from the program. This is not a tribute, it's a translation. Gasps rippled as she pulled the cord. The quilt unfurled slowly, rippling, defiant, whole. People wept. Some applauded. Some just stood still and felt it. Marilyn remained seated, not frail, intentional, watching the next generation stand where she once wasn't allowed. She reached into her handbag and gripped the last card she'd written. The only thing it said was, "I kept the style that fit. The rest, I returned." She didn't hand it to anyone. Not yet. She folded it into the side seam of the quilt, hidden from view but not from knowing. Later that night, as the gallery emptied and laughter faded into parked cars, Marilyn stayed behind with Maya and Dolly. The lights dimmed. "I think we did it," Maya said. "No," Marilyn replied, looking up at the quilt one last time. "We wore it." Marilyn passed just after dawn. No machines, no hospital. Just quiet breath, one fading thread at a time. She was in her favorite chair, sunlight softening through the curtains, hands folded beneath the patchwork quilt Maya had sewn, bound by Dolly's final stitches. Dolly sat beside her, one hand on the armrest. Maya knelt on the floor, forehead pressed gently to Marilyn's knee. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. When the final breath left her, it wasn't sharp. It was still, like silk falling from a hanger. The service was held 3 days later in the garden behind Hearth and Grace. No pews, just benches, no podium. Just a folding chair with a single linen scarf laid across the seat. The invitation list was handwritten and brief. Trevor, Dolly, Maya, Nessa, Clara from the shelter. 3 women who wore her coats now. Chloe was not notified. No malice. Just math. Absence, plus silence, pack a peace. Maya stood beneath the arbor and read from the note Marilyn had tucked into her coat pocket. "If you ever feel too loud, too much, too anything." She paused, eyes scanning the faces of women who had survived things no obituary could name. She wore dignity even when mocked, Maya said, voice unshaking. She wore strength even when told she should shrink. And somehow she left this world more dressed than she found it. Dolly dabbed at her cheek with a hemmed linen square. Trevor looked down, lips pressed, glasses fogging. The ashes would be used for the textile sculpture, but that day, Maya laid one final piece into the roots of the garden. A swatch of navy wool, and a corner of the silk scarf Marilyn had worn the day she mailed the brooch. The brooch itself had not stayed at the museum. Marilyn had requested it be returned quietly, no fanfare. She left no instructions beyond that, but Maya understood. She unstitched a corner of the quilt from the final threads exhibit, slipped the brooch inside, and sewed it back shut. It now lived inside the layers, buried not underground but in legacy. Hidden, yes, but not lost. The local paper ran a front-page feature the following Sunday. The Woman Who Clothed the Forgotten, a seamstress of story, strength, and second chances. There were no photos of her from the waist up, just hands, adjusting a hem, pinning a lapel, pressing fabric against the curve of a collarbone. Below the headline was a quote, "She left nothing behind. She passed it all forward." The piece went viral within a week. Marilyn's name became something more than a footnote. It became a symbol, not of fashion, of fortitude. Chloe found out through the paper. Her jaw tensed at the headline. Her fingers clenched when she reached the second paragraph and found no mention of herself. Not as daughter, not even as mourner. She clicked through comments on the digital version. She was a pillar. Wish I'd known her. My mom wore one of her coats. Said it was the first time she felt seen in years. This woman saved lives. Not a single post about Thanksgiving. Not a single person echoing her blog. Then her phone buzzed. An alert from her lawyer's office. Subject line: Final notification, estate closed. Inside was a link to the updated ledger. Maya's name appeared 13 times. Chloe's, 0. At the bottom, a line in bold. This trust was built on discretion, not forgiveness. Contestation is considered a severance of eligibility. She stared at the screen long after it went dim. Her daughter now bore the name she'd tried to erase, the legacy she'd mocked, the dignity she once discarded at a dinner table. Back in the gallery, the quilt remained untouched. Maya stood before it one final time, hand resting lightly where the brooch now slept. The ribbon tag still read, "For the women who outgrew apology." But now, beside it, a second line had been added. "In memory of the woman who taught us where to wear our names." In the notebook Marilyn left behind, tucked in the back pocket beneath a pressed sprig of rosemary, Dolly found one last line. Not dated, not signed. Just there, like a final hem tucked invisible. "My daughter mocked my old clothes at Thanksgiving, so I dressed her out of my legacy.